Isometric, example 2. In the previous example, we went through a case where we had cut out sections in all three views, and after cutting out all these pieces, we ended up with the final shape. In this example, that won't exactly be the case, so let's look at what happens if that is the case. So we start in the same way by first looking at how big our block needs to be. In this case, we actually have grid lines, so we can count the grid lines. Here our width is 4, our height is 4, our length is 6. And so we know when we start drawing our block, so we always start with this square piece, then we have these 30-degree angles coming out. So say that is 4 for us. The height is also 4. And we have this, if that is 4, it's just a little bit longer than that. So that's approximately how we size our block. Remembering all the lines that go up run parallel to each other, and all the lines that run across run parallel to this line. And so we start by completing our block before we continue. Okay, so remember what we said before. We look at where there are pieces that are cut out. And so if we look at our principal view, in this case we have these two sections that are completely cut away. So we'll take the principal view and start with each of these sections and cut them away. The first one is one block up, so if that was halfway, approximately there, and 2 blocks in, so halfway, and divide that into 3 pieces. Because we're not using a ruler, we just proportionally estimate how big these pieces are. Now remember, we have the shape on the front. Because we're looking at the principal view from this direction, we'll extend the lines here parallel to all these lines. So all these lines run parallel right through the block because we're cutting it all the way through to the back. And we make the dots here at the back surface, and we connect them in the same way as they were in the front. And then of course for your case, you'll have pencil, so you'll just erase these lines to make it easier for yourself to see what you have left. The second part is this block in the front that we have, so let's recreate that. Again, we have it 1 block in and 3 blocks down, so when we draw the shape, remembering to stay these lines all parallel, these lines are all parallel to these, that is our block shape. Now in this case, we're still looking in this direction, and we want to extend these points all the way through the block. But in this case, if we extend them, they're extending actually behind this component, so we won't actually see anything. So we can just erase this part, because the rest we won't see. The details, the hidden details on an isometric we don't show. So now we've covered these 2 cut out pieces. Do we have our final shape? If we just consider, for example, the principal view, we see on the principal view that we have this shape, which we have part of it, but there's a small little triangle that we don't see yet. Also, if we look at the right view, for example, so if we had to look at the right view, we see we have this bottom shape, but then we have a dividing line here that we don't see on this yet. Now remember, every solid line here is an indication of a change in depth. So there's somehow a change in depth here. And how do we know how deep this change is? We look at our right view. So let's first just draw this onto our principal view. So if we draw that shape on, that's what it would look like. But now we know it's not lying on this front face. It's lying somewhere into the depth of this block. When I'm looking from this side, it's lying somewhere in this direction. How do I know where it's lying? On my right view, you see this solid line here. So if I had that solid line drawn in here, it would mean that this shape is somewhere into the depth of this block, and where I see another solid line, that's an indication of where that shape will then lie. So what I'm going to do is, I'm again looking at my shape like I would do when I'm cutting through a block. But in this case, I'm not cutting through the block, but I'm actually cutting only up to this line. So this line up to there, and that same distance I extend these lines. And then I connect these lines. So these two lines are connected on the front, which means these two lines will connect to the back. These two lines are connected in the front, these two lines are connected in the back. So this triangle shape is into the block, and that's the depth. It's this depth into the block that I have. And then of course you can erase this line, and you'll see that that's the shape that you have. Now if I'm looking from the front, I can see I have this shape and I have the triangle. And from the right view, I can see that there's two different planes here, a diagonal one and a straight one, but both of them will look clear if I'm looking straight from the right. The last part here will be the circle, and we'll do the circle in the same way as we did it before. So first we identify where the center line is. So the center line is 2 blocks in. So I know if this is 2 blocks is here, and 2 blocks is here. So remember, these lines have to run parallel. And so the actual cross in the center of the circle is not a cross like this, but it's running across in this orientation because it's now on this isometric face. And then I can also say my circle is 1 block wide. So 1 block there, 1 block here, 1 block, 1 block. And you can make yourself a little square to help you. And remember, you can also have additional lines across here and add extra radius points if that helps you to make your circle. And then finally you'll draw the circle on that face. Remember that we also add the center line. And that will be your final block. So just to highlight what the block would look like if you erase all the lines. And I strongly suggest as you draw and you delete parts that you erase the lines that you delete, as to not confuse you with all the different construction lines that you have. We don't want to see any construction lines in the final answer. The only thing we see is the final block. So that will be the final shape. Different to the first example, because in this case we only had a section here where it's into the depth and not running all the way through the block. So that's how you would do it if you had a piece that's not cut all the way through the block.